In the show Fallout, it is set 219 years after the first bombs dropped. The bombs dropped around the early 60s. Nuclear war broke out, and, it doesn't go well when nuclear bombs drop. You get the idea. We get introduced to 3 characters, and the first one we'll talk about is Lucy. She lives in Vault 33. Around this time, a bunch of vaults were built for basically the rich people to survive, and those vaults don't get opened. So you have communities living underground, kind of oblivious to what's going on up top, which they call the wasteland. And for Lucy, she's one of those people. She's grown up her entire life in the vault. Her extracurricular activities are great. She lives with her father, who's an overseer, basically the mayor of Vault 33. His name is Hank, and also her little brother, Norm. She's a really important figure in the vault. The only thing missing is a husband. And when you're living in close quarters, options are pretty slim. I mean, you've got your cousins, and while it's not frowned upon to mess around with them, it is frowned upon to marry them. And for Lucy, she just hasn't found a match. So when this happens, something occurs called the triennial trade with Vault 32, or Vault 31. They're all kind of connected in a triangle. And what this is an arranged marriage. She's going to meet somebody she's never met before, she's going to marry them, and hopefully live happily ever after. This actually happened to her father. He had never met Lucy's mother before they ended up getting married, but he fell madly in love with her. Lucy makes her pitch on why she should be chosen for this in front of the council, and they approve it. And there's no time to waste. There's no real planning. Her best friend Stephanie helps her with this, and Stephanie's just excited because they get to grow old and raise their kids together. A couple hours later, with Lucy's dress on and makeup done, she gets ready to meet her husband. The connecting vault door opens, and they get introduced to the people of Vault 32. Now, recently, Vault 32 did have a tragedy. Their overseer passed away. The new overseer, Lee Moldaver, is the one to greet Hank, Lucy, and the rest of the members of Vault 33. This is basically going to be a trade-off. Vault 32 is giving Vault 33 a guy to pair with Lucy, and in turn, Vault 33 is giving Vault 32 supplies. And when it comes time for Lucy to meet her future husband, she gets extra excited because his name is Monty, and folks, he's a snack. Oh yeah. And shortly after meeting, they get married, and then both vaults have a big party together in Vault 33. Although Monty isn't much for words. After a little bit of dancing, a little bit of eating, Monty asks her, hey, can you show me to where I'm going to be living the rest of my life? And Lucy's more than happy to do that, and shortly after the door closes, Monty's clothes comes off, Lucy's clothes comes off, and they consummate that thing. And it's hot and spicy. But as those two are banging each other's brains out, Norm gets a little curious. The party's still raging on, but he starts walking around the vault, and the door to Vault 32 is still open. And as he walks further inside, he notices that all their crops are dead, but that's not the only thing that's dead. There are people that are dead in the vault. The people that are out in Vault 33 representing as Vault 32, they're not quite right. And a short time later, Lucy gets tipped off to this when she hears screaming. She then starts quickly noticing some oddities with Monty, so she throws on her Pip-Boy, which is a Vault Tech sort of smartphone. That's the best way I can describe it. It's their version. It connects to your wrist. It does a lot of things, and one of those things is alerting you to if there's radiation around. And when Lucy gets close to Monty, he's radiating with radiation. It tips off Lucy the fact that Monty is not from Vault 33. He's from up top, which means he's a raider. When Monty's discovered, he attacks Lucy, and he does let her know that the last couple hours have been the best day of his life, but unfortunately, she's got to go because the jig's up. Lucy, however, fights Monty off because she is well-trained, and she is able to kill him, although it comes at a price. She gets stabbed in the process, so she's got to grab a stim pack, which heals her up and numbs the pain. As she slowly makes her way out of her quarters, she notices that her entire vault is under attack by these raiders. This was all planned out by Lee Moldaver. And Vault 33 is putting up a fight, but it's difficult. They didn't see this coming. And by the end of it, it puts Overseer Hank in a tough bind. Because he's got 6 of his people as hostages. And all it's going to take is Lee to give the order for her men to shoot him. That's when Overseer Hank says, I'm pretty sure I know who you are. And Lee says, everybody knows who I am. But do they know who they are? They are the product of one of life's tricky little choices. So I'm going to offer you a choice. Them or Lucy. Hank decides to lock Lucy up so that she'll be safe because Lee has set up detonation devices. So Hank needs to make sure that his daughter doesn't blow up. Lee's men then attack Hank and start taking him prisoner, and then Lee walks over to the window of the room where Lucy's being held and just says, "You look like your mother," and then walks off. Lucy doesn't have many memories of her mom, so that's a little telling. In doing all of this, though, Hank did save everybody, because while Lee does trigger the detonation device, 6 of the people get to hide, and Lucy is safe. But at the end, Vault 33 has a lot of cleanup to do. They've also got a few prisoners, but the only thing that Lucy and Norm care about is where their dad is. Lucy especially wants to go up top to the surface and try to look for him, but the council won't allow it. And Norm says, "They're not going to allow it, Lucy. They don't want to find Dad. If they did, they wouldn't get a chance to be in charge." And sadly, Lucy knows that's correct, so she's going to take it upon herself. She arms up and heads to the vault door. She instructs her cousin Chet, who's got a major thing for Lucy, to open it up. And this is a big no-no. But Chet and Norm do it. They say their goodbyes to Lucy. And even though the vault does open and Lucy leaves, they're caught. They're going to have to answer for that. Lucy, though, is finally at the top in the wasteland, and she's marveling at the views. She's never seen anything like it. Now, some of the protectors of the wasteland are the Brotherhood of Steel, and that's when you get introduced to Maximus. Maximus has dreamed about being a member of the Brotherhood since he was a little boy. He was saved by a member of the Brotherhoods, and thus he wanted to be like him. He wanted to save people, protect them, so he enlisted. Unfortunately for Maximus, he really only has one friend, Dane. Everybody else kind of bullies him and picks on him. He's not the best enlistee. Yet, he still has his eyes on the prize. Being a member. Right now, he's just an aspirant, which is a trainee. And what the Brotherhood does isn't just protecting those in the wasteland. They also preserve history. They look for pre-war tech, most of it from a company called Vault Tech, and they either restore it, keep it, preserve it, you name it. Now, a lot of it is just simple stuff that we as individuals today recognize, like toasters and circuit boards and stuff like that. Nothing out of the ordinary. But for these people who've been living without it for 219 years, that kind of tech is big, and they search it out. They also go on missions, and they get a badass suit of armor to do it. One particular day, an airship drops down, and Maximus finds out that they're promoting some of the aspirants, and one of those is going to be Dane. Normally, he probably would be happy for his friend, but he's not, and it's because Dane was one of many to get chosen, which means that Maximus was looked over. And because of that, he's pissed off. Although, the next morning, the entire barracks are woken up by Dane screaming, because somebody snuck a razor blade into Dane's boot, and when Dane put it on, it sliced up their leg real good. There's only a certain number of people that could have done it, and Maximus, being close with Dane and being passed over, is looked at as a potential culprit. He's brought in front of Elder Quintus and accused of doing these crimes, but he is adamant that he had nothing to do with it. And then he finds out that he's actually taking Dane's spot, which is exciting. Now, he's not going to get a suit of armor. He's going to be accompanying one of the members of the Brotherhood of Steel. But he's well on his way to becoming a full-fledged member. This is a promotion. And the reason that they needed new people is because they have a big mission. It comes from the highest clerics. Elder Quintus tells everybody that there is a denizen of the Enclave that has escaped. And when he escaped, he did so with an object that has profound potential to harm the nation. But that same item could also save the nation. Each knight is going to search a section of the wasteland and try to find the target. They're given a sketch of what the guy looks like and also his dog. And then they're sent on their way to try to find the target. But they aren't the only ones who are looking for this target. No, there's been a bounty put on this guy's head throughout the wasteland. And there's a ghoul who's after it. He's been alive since the bombs dropped. He's a former movie and TV star named Cooper Howard. Now he just goes by the ghoul. Because when the bombs dropped, it affected his body. And he's not a feral ghoul, but he's dangerous. And he, just like the Brotherhood, wants to cash in on that bounty and find the target. And in episode 2, you learn who the target is. He's a doctor who worked for Vault-Tec named Siggy Wilzig. He worked on all sorts of things. One of them being the breeding of dogs, which he ended up taking one, raising her as a puppy, and that becoming his companion, but also his protector. And there's no bigger example of this than one particular day when Dr. Wilzig decides to shoot himself full of an item and he gets caught. And the dog ends up attacking the guy who is trying to yell at, punish, apprehend Dr. Wilzig. We don't know, but the dog ends up killing the guy. And it forces Dr. Wilzig on the run. Whatever Dr. Wilzig escaped with, it's currently in his neck. But it's also very important, and that's why there was a bounty put on his head. Now, for Lucy, she has no idea about this. She is just dead set on finding her father. But exploring the wasteland is a lot. It's just like something she's never seen before. There's destruction. There's sand everywhere. There's blown out houses. Yet she does all of this with a smile on her face. Because overall, she's a very positive and polite person. And even though she doesn't know it, she's actually the first one to encounter Dr. Wilzig. While she makes camp for the night, she's woken up by Dr. Wilzig's dog. But the dog doesn't attack her. No, the dog attacks a cockroach. And these cockroaches aren't like the ones that we encounter today. They're very, very dangerous. In fact, the radiation blew up every kind of animal you can think of. So rats, bears, cockroaches. They're 3 to 4 times their normal size. And they're all dangerous. And they're all out in the wilderness. And because of this, and because Dr. Wilzig realizes that Lucy is a legitimate vault dweller, he warns her to go back home, go where she came from, because she's not built for this lifestyle and what these elements possess. But Lucy explains to him that she can't go home, not until she finds her father or Lee Moldover. And before he takes off, Dr. Wilzig says, if you're going to stay, then you're going to have to adapt, or you're not going to survive. Dr. Wilzig continues to make his way towards a little commune called Philly. It's not Philadelphia, because I'm from Philadelphia, and boy, it doesn't look like it. But he's unaware of just how many people are after him, like the Brotherhood. Now, Maximus is tagged with a knight called Knight Titus. He's basically his lackey. And Knight Titus is a douchebag. At one point on the ride over to Philly, he gets bored. He tells the chopper to just drop him off. He's got to shoot something. They'll walk the rest of the way. But they encounter a cave, and they notice that there have been people there, including a human and a dog. It fits the target's description. They can see the tracks. So they know they're on the right path. And it is true. Dr. Wilzig was around that cave, but he quickly got out of there when he noticed all the bones around it. He didn't want to be whatever was in that cave's dinner. As for Knight Titus, well, he decides to investigate, or at least have Maximus investigate it. And what they find is an oversized bear ready to attack. And the bear doesn't attack Maximus, it attacks Titus, and it injures him pretty good. Maximus actually saves Knight Titus's life, but in doing so, he ends up getting yelled at by Knight Titus, threatened by him, which is really dumb, because Knight Titus needs a stim pack to survive. And that's when Maximus decides, you know what, I'm not going to give you a stim pack, I'm going to let you die, and then I'm just going to take your suit. Knight Titus warns him that if he does that, he's going to be tried, hanged, killed, all of that. But Maximus says, not if I bring back the target. They're not even going to think of you. So he enacts his plan. He lets Knight Titus die. He takes his suit, and suddenly he has promoted himself to knight status. And after getting acclimated with the suit for a little bit, he heads off to the closest town, which is Philly. And Lucy does the same thing. She encounters her second person out in the wasteland, just some random guy, and he gives her direction to Philly, but he does warn her, it is very dangerous. Most of my family has died there. Well, Lucy needs to find her dad, and she's not all that concerned about it. So she heads to Philly, and she is shocked at what she finds. Yeah, it's definitely a community, but it's unlike any she's ever seen before. They're selling all sorts of goods. They're selling all sorts of food. She is in awe of her surroundings currently. But she still has her eyes on the prize, finding her dad, or at least finding information that can help her find Lee Moldover. She thinks she's on the right track when she notices a shop that has some Vault-Tec equipment in it, so she walks in. She walks up to the owner, a woman named Ma June, and she explains that she noticed that she has an assortment of Vault-Tec equipment, and the only way to get that is to trade it with thieves. And that could actually help her out because she's looking for one particular criminal But Ma June, however, ignores everything she says because she's in shock that she is in the company of a legit vault dweller. It's not until Lucy mentions the name Lee Moldover that Ma June's entire mood changes. She tells Lucy everybody knows who Moldover is. Get out of here. Lucy walks out of the shop and she walks right into Dr. Wilzig. And Wilzig is surprised to see her, but he once again reiterates, "You really need to go home." And Lucy kind of laughs and says, "Yeah, that's what people keep telling me." But then Ma June comes out, recognizing Dr. Wilzig, confirming that it's him and trying to usher him into her shop. Because Ma June has been hired by somebody to make sure that Dr. Wilzig gets safe passage. What Ma June wasn't banking on was that the ghoul is in the town, he was observing the shop, he saw everything that happened, and he wants Dr. Wilzig. He's going to get in the way of that whole safe passage crap. As Ma June is telling the ghoul that he's not welcome there, Lucy gets her first taste of what life in the wasteland is like when the ghoul shoots off Dr. Wilzig's foot. I mean, clean off. Ma June tries to hire anybody to kill the ghoul, 1,000 caps, and that doesn't go well because the ghoul is such a good shot. He starts picking off people one by one. And on top of it, because he's a ghoul, when he does get shot, it doesn't affect him like everybody else. During this firefight, the ghoul is the calmest customer in Philly. He leaves a bunch of dead bodies, and those that aren't dead, they're severely injured, including Ma June. When it looks like the ghoul is taking care of everybody in Philly who wants the smoke, he walks up to Dr. Wilzig, and that's when Dr. Wilzig's dog attacks him, and the ghoul is forced to take out a knife and stab her, severely injuring the dog. There's only one person that can help Wilzig at this point, and it's Lucy, and she tries to step in. She tries to handle herself with manners and politeness, nicely asking the ghoul to walk away and leave Dr. Wilzig, but he's not about to do that. So Lucy tries to shoot him with a tranquilizer dart, which doesn't work. And the ghoul is about to shoot Lucy back with a real gun, but he's distracted when Knight Maximus shows up just in the nick of time. Maximus actually saves Lucy's life by shielding her from any of the ghoul's bullets. Maximus explains that the guy out there, Dr. Wilzig, is important and he's been sent there to find him, so he instructs Lucy to get him inside while he deals with the ghoul. And Lucy does that. Dr. Wilzig is badly injured. Ma June makes a makeshift foot for him, but she's hardly a doctor. And it's obvious that Dr. Wilzig is in extreme pain. He needs somebody to escort him across the wasteland, and he says, well, she can do it, and he points to Lucy. And Ma June kind of laughs because she doesn't think that Lucy's built for that, but there's not a lot of people that they can trust at this point. So Lucy's it. Lucy's going to have to make sure that this guy gets safe passage to wherever he's going. And Lucy isn't really interested in doing any of that. She just wants to find her dad. And that's when Ma June says, well, the thing is, the person that hired me to get Dr. Wilzig to safety is Lee Moldover. And you're not going to be able to get in Lee's presence without a bartering chip. And this guy is it. So if you want to get your dad back, make sure this guy gets to her safely. That changes everything for Lucy. She agrees to take Dr. Wilzig wherever he needs to go. And Ma June puts the coordinates into her Pip-Boy so she has the directions. With the fight between Maximus and the ghoul still raging on, it allows Lucy and Dr. Wilzig to escape out the back door. And as they're fleeing the town, Lucy sees in the sky Maximus fly off, and she thinks that Maximus is taking care of the ghoul, but it's actually far from the case. Maximus isn't an expert on how to handle that suit. The ghoul, however, has read a couple of manuals, and he basically shot Maximus away. He's still very much alive. When he walks back into Ma June's store, he sees the prosthetic box, so he knows that they can't be getting far. And then he decides to save the dog. The dog is on death's door, but he shoots him with a stim pack, and now the dog goes from being loyal to Dr. Wilzig to being loyal to the ghoul and being his companion. By nightfall, the two head out of Philly and try to track down the target. And the target is not doing well. Dr. Wilzig is not going to make it. He knows that. He and Lucy stop off for a little bit of a break, and Dr. Wilzig tells her as much, but he's making sure that he's not going to make it. He drank some cyanide. It's only a matter of time before he dies. He tells Lucy that it's not important that he arrives safely. What's important is that she bring his head to Lee Moldover. Because what he stole is in his neck. So as long as he brings the head, that should be good enough. He being alive has nothing to do with it. Lucy doesn't want to do this. She definitely doesn't want to cut his head off, but he's begging her, and he explains if you're going to survive up here, you need to start acting like a surface dweller, not a vault dweller. Okay, Miss McLean? And Lucy asks him, how do you know my last name? Because she's never said it before. But he doesn't answer because the cyanide takes effect and he dies. With no other choice, Lucy does as she's instructed, cuts the head off, and starts taking it to those coordinates in a bag. In episode 3, you get an update on what's going on in Vault 33. They're not happy with Chet, and they're certainly not happy with Norm. Chet, he's a pushover. He finds the council pretty intimidating. Norm? He doesn't. He doesn't care. He thinks the fact that he and Chet are even up for punishment is a joke. Because the Raiders, the ones that they have in custody, oh, they're being treated great. But yet, he and Chet are being punished for opening the vault door. And the council try to make Norm understand that by opening the vault door, they are putting everybody at risk. The only way the Raiders got into Vault 32 was because somebody must have opened the door. The vaults are impenetrable. But Norm still believes that the vault dwellers should be the ones on trial here, not himself. And when it comes time for an actual punishment, Betty, one of the council members, decides to put Norm on food distribution duty for those prisoners so he can look at them every single day. And there is no remorse with the Raiders. The council also meets about what to actually do with these Raiders, and then later on, when they come to a decision, they hold a vault meeting. What they've decided is to try to integrate them into the Vault Society. After all of the people they lost, they could definitely use the manpower, they could use the people, and they feel like with rehabilitation and training, they could just adapt them to becoming productive members of the society. And there's a lot of support for this, but there's also a little bit of backlash. One of the people being Hank, who has no filter and says, yeah, I think we should treat them like they treated us and kill them. But the other person who agrees with him is Stephanie, Lucy's best friend, who lost her husband in the Raider fight. She believes that the Raiders should pay, and they shouldn't be welcomed with open arms. But the insurrection also came at a big cost. The water filter is broken. They only have enough water to keep the population alive for 2 months. Oh, and they also have a lack of actual leadership. The council, which is made up of Betty, Woody, and Reg, they can't come up with a new clear overseer. It's really a power struggle between Woody and Reg. So that's what's going on in Vault 33. On the outside, Maximus needs to fix what the ghoul destroyed in his Brotherhood of Steel armor. He goes to a repair shop in Philly to get it fixed, but when he returns, he sees that there are a bunch of miscreants trying to take apart his suit for scrap metal, and he fights them off, or at least he tries to. He's getting his ass kicked. I mean, these people would have killed him if not for the actual suit. It connects to Maximus, and it kills all of them. The suit saves his life, but he has an issue. Before he went to go get the suit repaired, he got a call from HQ wanting to know why he missed his check-in. Of course, they're looking for Knight Titus. They have no idea that Knight Titus is dead, and now it's Maximus running the ship. So Maximus just pretends to be Knight Titus, and he makes up a lie saying that they were attacked, and his squire, a.k.a. Maximus, died in the battle. HQ tells him that they're going to send him another squire, but Maximus doesn't want that. He doesn't want to get caught. Unfortunately for Maximus, it's too late. They drop a squire off at his last known location, which is Philly, and it forces Maximus to have to run back to the suit, get suited up so he isn't caught, and then greet this squire, who turns out to be a guy that used to bully Maximus back at the barracks. Now it's time for Maximus to make this dude pay. But it does turn out they make a pretty good team. Because the squire, whose name is Thaddius, comes up with a pretty good idea to track the body. He uses radiation from the ghoul. They track the ghoul all the way to Dr. Zilwig's body. The ghoul was there a little while earlier. And they see that Dr. Zilwig's head is missing. So the body must not be important. The only thing that's important is the head. And they continue on, looking for the ghoul, which would lead them to the body, which would lead them to the head. They just need to get there first. And of course, the ghoul is tracking Lucy. Using the dog as a tracker, it's not hard for the ghoul to be right on her tail. And Lucy has made it all the way to a river that's full of radiation, and full of monsters that she's never seen before. In fact, she's attacked by one. It looks like a giant catfish that not only attacks her, but steals the head from her. And before she can really react, she turns around to see that the ghoul is pointing a gun at her head. She tries to plead her case to the ghoul, saying that she needs the head. She needs the head to barter with Lee in order to get her father back, but the ghoul does not care. Instead, the ghoul straps her up and uses her as bait to attract the big giant radiated catfish so that hopefully he can get the head. And it does work. The catfish does end up picking up on Lucy's scent and attacking, but also getting away in the process. And boy, does this piss the ghoul off. He feels like that was his one chance to get the head, and he missed it. He's not going to be able to attract this catfish again. So the ghoul decides to take her prisoner. And as they're walking away from the river, Lucy asks, "Where are we going?" But he doesn't answer. And he's leaving the dog behind, which Lucy points out, only to hear the ghoul say, "Yeah, well, he ain't mine." The ghoul's got other plans. And as they trek back through the wasteland, the ghoul comes across a billboard promoting Vault-Tec, and he decides to shoot the little Vault-Tec mascot. Because as it turns out, the ghoul, or Coop, as he was known back in the 1960s, he was actually the first mascot for Vault-Tec, and he holds a little bit of a grudge. But they should have stayed. Because just after the ghoul and Lucy took off, Maximus and Thaddius arrive. They're tracking the head, unaware of the giant catfish, and as they enter the water, the catfish attacks them. Maximus, in this giant, cumbersome suit, doesn't have a lot of options. He's slow and bulky. So Thaddius shoots the catfish, but the catfish turns his attention to Thaddius and attacks him. Now it's on Maximus to save Thaddeus' life because just moments ago Thaddius saved his. And he's able to. While the catfish is trying to swallow Thaddius, Maximus continues to pull back, and ultimately it kills the catfish, but it also empties out its stomach right before it dies, and one of the items is the head. To which the dog runs right up to it and starts licking it. Because, it's his owner. In episode 4, the ghoul continues to drag Lucy throughout the wasteland for whatever reason. She has no idea where they're going or why they're headed there. At one point, though, on their journey, they hear screaming from a house, so they go to investigate it. And it's actually somebody that the ghoul knows. It's another ghoul named Roger. While Roger isn't feral yet, he's certainly on the right path. He's turning, and he knows it. He could be saved by getting a chemical vial, but he's out of money. It's one of the reasons why he was after the bounty, just like the ghoul. And those vials are one of the reasons why the ghoul has lasted as long as he has in the wasteland. He's really good at making money, and with that money, he purchases the vials, which keeps him from turning. But for Roger, it's a lost cause. So the ghoul kind of distracts him, and then he puts him out of his misery, which completely disgusts Lucy because she's just not used to the lifestyle that is accustomed to being up top. She's even more disgusted, though, when the ghoul starts picking Roger apart for scrap. And finally, the ghoul says, "What did you say your name was?" And she says, "Lucy McLean." And the name McLean sounds really familiar to the ghoul. Either way, he just tells her, "Well, look, Lucy McLean, the way we survive up here is a little bit different than the way you survive down there." And boy, is it ever. He literally starts eating Roger. And the ghoul is content with all this until Lucy insults him by saying, "How do you live like this?" So he makes her start to skin Roger up. They then continue to make their way towards wherever the ghoul is leading Lucy to, but the elements are really starting to get to her. She hasn't had clean water in a while, and she's been resisting drinking any water around because it's filled with radiation. Anytime she gets close to it, her Pip-Boy starts going off. Eventually, though, she's forced to give in. For a guy like the ghoul, the radiated water, it doesn't matter. But for Lucy, never having drank it, it is a big change. But it's one she needs to do to survive. While she's drinking the radiated water, she does notice that the ghoul is in rough shape. He starts really coughing up a storm. As he's gasping for air, Lucy decides to take off running, trying to escape. The ghoul, however, lassos her up. And as he's trying to corral her, she bites his finger off. And the ghoul decides an eye for an eye, or in this case, a finger for a finger, and he cuts Lucy's finger off. Yeah, Coop shows no mercy when it comes to Lucy. A little while later, while missing a finger, they finally arrive at the destination. It's an old supermarket. Using a speaker box, the ghoul is able to talk to somebody on the inside and let them know that he's going to do a transaction. 60 vials, which is 2 months' supply, for one semi-mint condition female. And the person on the inside says, yeah, that works. Send her in. And Lucy, having no clue what she's walking into, is forced to walk into that supermarket at gunpoint. She walks in very sheepish, where she's greeted by a robot named Mr. Handy. There's a bunch of different kinds of Mr. Handys. There's mechanics, there's artillery ones, but this case, it's a medical Mr. Handy, who recognizes that she's missing a finger and he fixes it right away. And she's really thankful for it. She tells this Mr. Handy, I actually thought that I was going to be a sex slave. And he says, no, that's ridiculous. I would never do that. I'm just going to harvest your organs. And that's when she starts to get really concerned. Before she can even react, she's gassed and knocked out. And then Mr. Handy starts wheeling her over to the people that are actually in charge. It's these two stoners. And as he's wheeling her over, she starts to wake up, and she passes by a bunch of the freezer section where there are human beings in there, although most of them are ghouls. The two stoners that are in charge give the Mr. Handy the okay to get the deal done quickly, harvest the organs, sell them, and he goes about doing that, but Lucy fights back. Using a defibrillator, she's able to avoid the Mr. Handy frying most of it and actually rewiring it to work for her. Now with this Mr. Handy working for her, she walks up to the two guys that were in charge and tells them that if they don't let her and the rest of their hostages go, then she's going to have Mr. Handy shoot them up with something called a Brexo. It's drainage fluid, but man, it'll mess your day up. Basically, it'll kill you. With no other choice, they free the hostages, but they don't free the feral ones. And Lucy says, hey, I said all of the hostages. And they try to explain to her, yeah, that's going to be a mistake, but Lucy doesn't want to hear it because she's unaware of what feral ghouls are. So the guys say, okay, we'll free them. And they do that, and immediately the feral ghouls attack. Lucy's able to hide, but at the end of it, the feral ghouls, the two guys, the Mr. Handy, they all kind of kill themselves. There is, though, one feral ghoul left. It's a woman. And at first, Lucy tries to talk her down, but it doesn't work. She's feral. And when the woman attacks Lucy, Lucy's forced to kill her. It's the first time Lucy has really killed anything. When Lucy walks out of that supermarket, she's different. She's changed. But so has the ghoul. Coop is laying on the ground. He's in rough shape. He desperately needs a vial. And luckily for the ghoul, Lucy has brought him some. But before she gives him the vials, she tells him, hey, I might end up looking like you, but I'll never be like you. Then she drops the vials near his hand and reminds him about the golden rule, do unto others the way that you yourself want to be treated. Lucy then takes off on the road to find the head, and the ghoul, after taking the vials, ends up stumbling into the supermarket where he sees all the destruction that took place. And he's just really excited because with those two guys dead, he's able to take their vials. I mean, he's got a really big supply now. But then he gets distracted at one of their videotapes that they were watching. It's one of his old movies. He pops it in, he has a seat, and he watches his old self on TV for the first time in a long time. Now that's what's going on in the wasteland. Back at Vault 33, Reg and Woody continue to interrogate the raiders, but they're getting nowhere. Any question that they ask is being met with a non-answer. As for the other council member, Betty, she was busy having a conversation with Norm. The message is pretty clear. Because of who Norm is, or more importantly, because of who Norm's dad is, people do listen to him. So if he has doubts about what they're doing, he should really keep it to himself because it could create a little bit of an uprising. And Norm finds all of that hard to believe, that people would actually follow him. He's timid. He's not confident. But to Betty, she knows the people of Vault 33, and she knows what the McLean name means. Considering his dad and Lucy are both gone, he's the last remaining one, so his name does hold a bit of weight. Norm, however, is still really curious as to what happened in Vault 32. He decides to look on the computer to see if he can access the logs, but his account is denied. He's not going to be able to access it from his terminal in Vault 33. He's going to actually have to go to Vault 32. And if he's going to go there, he wants help. He goes and knocks on Chet's door, and Chet would love to get out because he actually started hooking up with Stephanie, Stephanie was pregnant. Stephanie started going into labor. Chet wasn't prepared for that. He was just looking to get it wet. So yeah, he's looking for any excuse to get the hell out of that room while a baby's being delivered. And he doesn't care where they're going. So he takes Norm up on the offer to head into Vault 32. And that's when Chet sees what Norm saw. Absolute destruction. There are bodies everywhere. Norm decides to check one of their pit boys, and he finds out that the last signal detected was 2 years ago. There's also the messages written in blood on the walls, like, "We know the truth." The images of the dead bodies. It looks like they either took their own lives or they strangled each other. It's just a really weird scene. The deeper in the vault they go, the more bodies they encounter. When they finally reach the overseer's office of Vault 32, they see that the body has been tied up. Looks like there was a complete mutiny. There's a message written in blood on the wall in the overseer's office that says, "Death to management." But none of this explains how these people died, who killed them, why they did what they did, and more importantly, how the raiders got in. So Norm checks the logs and he finds out that the vault was open from the outside, and the only way to do that is via a pit boy. And when he digs further, he finds out that the pit boy that opened the vault door was his mother's. In episode 5, Norm and Chet continue to walk around Vault 32 trying to make sense of everything they're looking at. They just can't quite figure out what happened. Eventually, they reach the entrance to Vault 31, and it's even more confusing than before. Because you have a bunch of dead bodies, but it looks like they were trying to get into the vault. And written in blood is a message that says, "We know what's in there." They get so freaked out, they run back to Vault 33, and they come up with an excuse on what they were doing. And while they are caught by Betty, it seems like she buys their excuse. That day, though, is election day for the new overseer, and it's down to the council members. So you've got Betty, Woody, and Reg. But as most people are casting their vote, Norm decides to go look into the records, and what he finds is a little interesting. It's a record of the inter-vault trades implemented for the distribution of personnel. And what it shows is every single elected overseer from Vault 33 came there from Vault 31. They even have a saying about it. When things look glum, vote for somebody from Vault 31. Although Norm didn't realize it was this bad. What's even weirder is the fact that 32 did the exact same thing every time they elected an overseer who came from Vault 31. He goes and tells Chet about this discovery, and Chet doesn't think it's weird because everything they know about Vault 31 is that it's just better. Luckily for them, they have somebody they can ask about this. Steph. Steph and her new baby are living with Chet, and they decide to ask her, "Hey, what's the difference between our vault and Vault 31? Because, as it turns out, Steph came from Vault 31. And the only thing she tells them is that the mashed potatoes are better. All in all, though, she's pretty cagey about the whole thing. The election goes down, and Betty, who comes from Vault 31, wins by a landslide. And later in the day, she has a vault-wide meeting. She tells everybody that she's been in discussions with the overseer from Vault 31, and they've decided that they need to repopulate Vault 32 after what the raiders did. So some people are going to stay in Vault 33, but some are going to go to Vault 32 to build it back up. And everybody starts walking back into Vault 32. Only Chet and Norm know what they're walking into. But what comes as a big surprise to Norm and Chet is that when they walk back into Vault 32, it's been cleaned up. I mean, all the dead bodies, gone. The blood on the walls, painted over. Norm goes deeper and deeper into the vault, looking for any sign of what happened, but he doesn't find it. And when he goes to the overseer's office, he gets cornered by Betty, who says, "Did you find anything interesting?" And all he says is, "Great job cleaning up." Betty starts saying something about how the raiders didn't break their spirits, and she starts walking off, but Norm stops her and says, "Hey, when my mother died, what happened to her pit boy?" And Betty looks at him a little concerned and says, "Well, it was buried with her. I know this because I did it, along with your father." Now, up at the top, Lucy continues to track the head when she comes across something a little interesting. It's a Brotherhood of Steel armor. It was under attack by giant cockroaches, and when she opens it up, she's surprised because there's Maximus clinging to life. Now, you might be wondering how Maximus found himself in this predicament. Well, it's because he and Thaddius decided to make camp for the night at that location, and they were getting along really well. Eventually, Maximus revealed to Thaddius who he was and how Knight Titus actually died. But instead of Thaddius being okay with this, he wasn't. When it became obvious to Maximus that Thaddius was planning on ratting him out, Maximus told him, "I'm sorry," and went to go attack him. But in that bulky suit, Thaddius was actually the quicker one, and he disengaged the suit and immobilized it completely, and that trapped Maximus inside. Thaddius did get injured, but all in all, he's able to easily hobble away with all of the goods, including the head, which left Maximus there for dead. Maximus would have died had it not been for Lucy. And even though they ran into each other back in Philly, Lucy still is a little concerned about helping out Maximus. But Maximus is able to convince her that she should trust him because she's going through radiation poisoning, and he's got something called Radaway, which helps combat radiation sickness. Lucy agrees to help him out. They exchange names, although Maximus does tell Lucy his name is Knight Titus. And shortly after Lucy frees Maximus, she faints from the radiation poisoning. And Maximus brings her back to health with the Radaway. Shortly after she comes to, he reveals to her that he didn't know anyone actually lived in those vaults. He's been told his entire life it was monsters, to which Lucy laughs at. But when Maximus tells her, all right, well, my squire stole something very valuable to me, she stops him and says, hey, how about we make a deal? I'm pretty sure everybody's after that head, and I have a tracker. So how about we work together, we find the head, and then you return it to the Brotherhood. And in return for my help, I use 4 to 5, maybe 6 Brotherhood members, and we go get my dad. Deal? And that's a deal that's too good for Maximus to pass up, so he agrees. And the two head off looking for this head. As they continue to walk and track the head, and they make small talk about each other's lives and what exactly happened the last 200 years, they come across a bridge and 2 people across from it. Now, Maximus, he is very, very concerned. He doesn't know who these people are, and more importantly, he doesn't know what weapons they have. And they, in turn, are also concerned for the same reasons. They don't know who Maximus is, they don't know who Lucy is, and they don't know what kind of weapons they have. Lucy, though, she is completely ignorant to all of it. She just doesn't understand why these people can't be trusted and why they can't just simply walk by them on their way to find the head. She also doesn't understand how Maximus isn't trusting them when they say they don't have weapons. Because Maximus thinks they're lying, and in reality, he is also lying. He tells them, I don't have any weapons, and he clearly does. Eventually, just to try to figure this thing out and get along their way, both parties agree to put their hands up and slowly walk by each other. But this was just as Maximus predicted. The people were armed, and not only were they armed, they were fiends, which are people that eat people. And they were going to be after whatever Lucy and Maximus had, and then likely eat them for dinner. Luckily for Lucy, Maximus was there. He shot both of them, but he does end up taking a bullet for his troubles, although he plays it off as nothing more than just a graze. He's lying about that too. It definitely went inside. Maximus tries to bandage it up, and they continue to walk on their way, and they get into a town called Shady Sands. And when Lucy sees the billboard for it, her mood changes. Because the billboard says, welcome to Shady Sands, first capital of the new California Republic, population 34,000, established in 2142. The reason she is so depressed about this is because she's been living in the vault her entire life, and they've been told that their purpose was to repopulate the earth. And here you've got a sign saying that it's already been repopulated, that 34,000 people lived here at one point, after the great bombs dropped. So the whole purpose of the vault was just a waste. And in order to make her feel better, Maximus says, I mean, if it makes you feel any better, it didn't work, because the town is basically deserted. And then he walks her over to a giant hole in the ground that was caused by a bomb dropping. Yeah, after the first bombs dropped, more bombs dropped afterwards. When Lucy mentions, I wonder if anyone survived, Maximus says, yeah, I did. But before he can expound on that, he says we should keep moving, but he's clearly in pain. And that's when Lucy notices that that bullet graze is a bullet wound. He was lying about it the entire time. He's in rough shape, and she knows that he has to get him somewhere and get him some help, or else he's going to die. They continue to stumble along until they find something called the Hawthorne Medical Laboratories, a division of the Vault-Tec Corporation. And Lucy wants to go in because she feels like that's the best bet in trying to find something that can help Maximus. But Maximus is reluctant to go in because he doesn't know what's in there. He tries to tell Lucy, hey, you should really be hesitant to do that, but she heads in anyway, and Maximus follows her in. And shortly after he enters the building, Lucy's nowhere to be found, so he's walking through pretty cautiously. At one point, he goes through one door, but it locks, and he can't get through the other door. He's trapped between these two doors. A siren starts going off. Smoke starts filling the room, and then the bottom drops out. When he eventually wakes up, Lucy is there with him. When he asks her, "What is this place?" she says, "You're in the best place in the world. It's a vault." And sure enough, it is. They're looking through this glass, and they're seeing people walk through, being productive members of this vault society. In episode 6, Lucy and Maximus get introduced to Bertie, who's one of the council reps for Vault 4. They're more than happy to help these two. For Maximus, it's just about getting bandaged up and making sure he's okay to get back. And also, Bertie lets him know that they've sent reconnaissance missions out to go grab his armor. So he'll have that back in no time, although it is missing a power core, which causes the damn thing to actually run. What's really surprising to Lucy is the fact that Bertie says she was born on the surface. She was born in Shady Sands. And not only Bertie, but a lot of them are from Shady Sands. They found Vault 4, and Vault 4 welcomed them in. And while Lucy thinks that's awesome and she wants to stay and see their community, Maximus wants to get back to finding the head. And it's Lucy who says, just give it some time here. With nothing to do but sit in quarantine, Lucy decides to ask Maximus, "Do you want to have sex?" And that's something that Maximus seems like he's never done before. He has no idea how it works. But Lucy's just so cavalier with it that it catches him off guard. While it is intriguing for Maximus, he does tell her that as a knight of the Brotherhood, he's not really supposed to. When they finally do get out of quarantine, Maximus tells Lucy, "I think these people are trying to trap us here." But Lucy thinks that's nuts, and the fact that she's come from a vault, she just assumes that it is a safe place. They then get a chance to meet the overseer of Vault 4, who is a guy named Overseer Benjamin, and he seems normal enough except for the fact that he has one eye and it's in the center of his forehead. Doesn't really seem like anyone else is fazed by this, as he goes over the rules, which basically is one rule: stay off level 12. And that causes Lucy to want to know what the hell is in level 12. Once Overseer Benjamin walks away, she starts looking around and she notices that a lot of the people in Vault 4 have certain body modifications. There's one particular guy, for example, who has a nose on his forehead, and it's just thought of as normal. Later on in the day, Lucy goes and has a conversation with Overseer Benjamin. She feels like she can relate to him because she was born in a vault. He's the overseer of a vault. Her dad was the overseer of a vault. Maybe she could get some information from him. And he does let her in on one thing. He's not a real big fan of bringing people in from the surface, but he's a 5th-generation vault dweller, and this is just the way of Vault 4. They welcome people in, so he's not going to stop. The conversation, though, is going pretty well until Lucy asks, "Hey, what's on level 12? And his entire mood changes. He kicks Lucy out. He doesn't answer that question at all. And while Lucy was having this conversation with Overseer Benjamin, Maximus was busy looking around the vault where he sees that his suit has been retrieved. Now it's just a matter of getting a power core. He asks one of the members of the vault, "Hey, how do you get your power?" And the guy directs him to where the location is. And sure enough, there is a power core. It would fit his power armor. It would be perfect. But right as he's about to pull it out, he gets caught by Bertie. He's a little apprehensive at first, but Bertie slowly coerces him into taking a Pip-Boy and going to an apartment that would be his. And he does it because he's never had one of those before. And when he goes there, there's even a welcome package from Bertie. And he starts adjusting to life in the vault. And boy, is he really enjoying it. Suddenly, Maximus has totally forgotten about the power core. As for Lucy, when she did get kicked out of Overseer Benjamin's office, she continued to walk around the vault, just like Maximus, and she came across a classroom. And the classroom has a whole time frame on Shady Sands, how it was founded, what happened to it, the bombs dropping, all of it. But it also has a giant new California Republic flag, and that's something that Lucy's never seen before. While she's admiring the flag, she gets distracted because there's a group of people headed in one direction. When she asks what's going on, one of the doctors says, "Oh, it's a surface dweller tradition." It gets a little rambunctious, but yeah, go ahead, check it out. So Lucy does that. And at first, it seems normal enough. It's just a bunch of people kind of praying, but then they start taking their clothes off. It's not a great look. I'm not even going to put a screenshot of it just because I don't want to get demonetized and you don't want to see it. And all of this, meanwhile, is being led by Bertie, who has the group going through some kind of chanting and ceremony, and it all has to do with bringing back the people that were taken from them when Shady Sands fell. At one point, they start chanting to bring back Shady Sands, blood must spill. And then when Lucy looks over, they're literally drinking blood. But that's when Lucy also notices that they have a giant banner to Lee Moldover. After the ceremony, all Lucy wants to do is go find Maximus, but he was busy getting accustomed to a certain lifestyle that he loves now. Lifestyle of the vault. She suddenly wants to leave, and it's now Maximus who's the one who wants to stay. She knows that the only way to get through to Maximus is to prove that these people are hiding something from them, so she goes to level 12. That's the only place that's off limits. And when she gets up there, she sees that there is a bunch of experimentation going on with humans. But there's also human beings who look to be frozen. As she's looking around at all these bodies in these hyperbaric chambers, she's caught. She's not only caught, she's apprehended, and she screams at Birdie, "Your entire culture is insane." And Birdie just says, "Well, I'm sure if we went to your vault, we'd say the same thing about you guys." They take Lucy away, and Maximus is none the wiser. And then we get an update on the ghoul. Not just an update, we get some backstory on him. The ghoul was indeed the first spokesperson for Vault-Tec, and it was very successful. But this was at a time where the Red Scare was going on, and communism was apparently running wild in Hollywood. For a guy like Cooper Howard, who fought the Soviets in Alaska, he really has no time for the Reds. And he thinks what he's doing with Vault-Tec is good. After all, his wife works for them. She's one of the upper management. But the fact is, he's looked at as a spokesperson for the end of the world. So he's dealt with a lot of flack, and because of it, he's also lost some jobs. After one particular commercial, they have a rap party at Cooper's house, and he meets up with one of his buddies named Sebastian Leslie, who actually is the voice of all the Mr. Handys. And Sebastian makes him feel way better about all of this by saying, "Look, man, you got to make a living, and we're all spokesperson for some people." But then he also lets him know about one of their mutual friends who apparently has lost a ton of work because he's allegedly a communist. And that's something that Coop can't quite figure out how that's even possible. He fought alongside this guy in Alaska, and now this guy's a communist? It just doesn't really add up. He decides one night to meet with the guy to find out what the hell's going on. And the guy doesn't admit to being a communist, but what he does admit to is being against companies like Vault-Tec. He thinks that Coop is drinking the Kool-Aid, and he's not really aware of what truly is going on. The fact that it's in Vault-Tec's best interest to keep this war going. The fact that the end of the world is very profitable for them. And if they had the cure to stop it, they would keep it under wraps because that's not profitable for them or their shareholders. He thinks that Coop is just being brainwashed by his wife, and he's completely bought in that all Vault-Tec cares about is keeping people safe in vaults. At the end of this meeting, he gives Coop a card and says, "Why don't you come to one of our meetings and see what we're talking about?" So he thinks about what this guy says, and he decides to take him up on the offer and attend one of these meetings. And upon arrival, he gets introduced to the person who's running the meeting, and it's Lee Moldover. So Coop and Lee have some history, but present-day Coop, he's got a ton of vials, and he's still after the head. Unfortunately for him, he is caught in the super-duper mart by the government. Mint spelled M-I-N-T. These are wannabe sheriffs who are dumber than a bag of rocks, and they take him, quote, into custody, where Coop actually knows the guy running the government. It's a guy named Sorrel Booker. And Sorrel knows Coop very well. He tells both sheriffs, this guy was the best bounty hunter in the area. You have no idea who you captured. With these two being somewhat acquainted, the ghoul asks Sorrel Booker, "Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about this Lee Moldover person." And Sorrel says, "Yeah, they call her the Flame Mother. But I'll tell you right now, she's dangerous." He then starts telling the ghoul how he can't actually let him leave because of everything he allegedly did in the Super Duper Mart, but the ghoul has other plans. He kills both the sheriffs, and then he goes over to the wanted poster and pulls Lee's photo off of it and says, "Why is she on your wall?" And Sorrel says, "That's Moldover. Why?" And this is the first time that the ghoul is connecting the fact that he knows Lee Moldover. He knows her from a long time ago. In episode 7, we get more backstory on how the ghoul knows Lee Moldover. Back when he first met her, she wasn't going by that name. She was going by a different one. And at first, Coop just sat in the meeting listening to it, but he could only take so much, and eventually he got up to leave, and she confronted him about it. She basically gave the same pitch that his friend gave, that Vault-Tec is making a lot of money based off the end of the world. And she knows it because she knows Coop's wife. It turns out that Lee's research company was acquired by Coop's wife's division. What Lee's company was on the verge of achieving was cold fusion. Basically, it's infinite energy. And just as she was on the verge of achieving it, Vault-Tec swept in and bought up every company she worked for. She then tells him that Vault-Tec bought the solution to end the war, but that wasn't going to be beneficial for him, so they stuck it in a closet. What she really wants is for Coop to help her get that solution back, and she hands him a listening device. She wants Coop to spy on his wife, but Coop doesn't want to do that, goes to give it back to her, and she says no, keep it. On the ride home, Coop thought about it and decided, yeah, all right. He connected the listening device to his wife Barb's Pip-Boy so that he would be able to listen to anything she said. And then he waited to see if what they said was true. But now that present-day Coop knows that Lee is the one that he talked to years ago, he wants to get to her. After holding a family at gunpoint, he finds out that Lee is at the conservatory. So he heads there. On his way to the conservatory, he finds that the dog, Dr. Wilzig's dog, is locked in an empty freezer. And the dog was put there by Thaddius, who was following Thaddius because Thaddius had the head. And Thaddius got tired of the dog just being a lackey, so he decided to put him in the freezer, and a couple hours later, he was found by the ghoul. The ghoul knows that he struck gold by finding the dog because the dog will be able to track the head. And as for Thaddius, he continued to make his way through the wasteland, but his banged up foot, the one that was injured when he was fighting with Maximus, it's in really, really, really bad shape. I mean, it is mangled up. He's making his way through the wasteland, but he's just hobbling at this point. And that's when he's stopped by a good old-fashioned wasteland snake oil salesman claiming to be a doctor who can help Thaddius out. Since Thaddius is in extreme pain, he takes him up on the offer. He gives Thaddius a potion, and in turn, Thaddius gives him Maximus's fusion core, which is worth a whole lot of money. And the potion works. It fixes Thaddius's mangled foot back to new. It's going to make getting back to the Brotherhood a lot easier. And after fixing his foot, the next stop he goes to is a radio station. Using the radio station, he's able to radio the Brotherhood, let him know where he is, so that they can pick him and the head up. And Thaddius is honestly lucky he made it through because the guy running the radio station has the whole place booby-trapped. If you get close, you're likely to hit one of those booby traps and die. But Thaddius made it through. And for the time being, he's just sitting, waiting for the Brotherhood to pick him up. Now, as for his former Brotherhood member, Maximus, he's none the wiser of the fact that Lucy is currently in custody with Bertie and Overseer Benjamin. And they try to set the record straight. They aren't doing any experimentation. It was the original vault dwellers who did the experimenting. They experimented on people that they trapped from the wasteland, and eventually those people rebelled. The current leadership of Vault 4, they're not doing any experimentation whatsoever. They've changed the culture of Vault 4. Lucy just says, look, that sounds horrible, but that's not the way it goes in my vault. And Benjamin asks, what was the experiment in Vault 33? And Lucy's completely oblivious to any experimentation that went down in Vault 33, so she just says there wasn't one. And both Bertie and Benjamin look at each other like, do you actually believe that she doesn't know this? Whether they believe her or not, though, they tell her that she has to pay the price. So they escort her to, quote, pay the price. And as they're escorting her, that's when finally Maximus notices that Lucy has been taken into custody. And even though he's loving life in the vault, he has to help her out. They go through this big ceremony and they chain Lucy up, and it looks like they're going to kill her. But in reality, they're just going to let her go. While they were doing the song and dance, though, Maximus was gearing up. He stole the fusion core, he put it in his suit of armor, and he went to go save Lucy. He smacked around a bunch of the Vault 4 dwellers. Until finally Lucy says, Maximus, they're letting me go, it's fine. And they do let them go. But once they're up on the surface, Lucy notices that Maximus stole their fusion core. And she knows what a fusion core means to a vault. She knows that they're not going to have a lot of time to live without it. So she kind of guilt trips Maximus to returning it. Even though that means that if they return the fusion core, Maximus is going to have to leave his armor there. But with Lucy guilt tripping him, he feels like he has no choice. So he does return it. Once he does that, Lucy invites him to live with them in Vault 33. She feels like Maximus is the first good person she's met out in the wild. But when Lucy says that Maximus seems like a good person, Maximus feels like he has to come clean to her. He has to tell her that his name is actually Maximus, not Titus, and Titus was the knight whose armor he basically took. But Lucy doesn't really care. She still invites him to live with her at Vault 33. And that's an offer that Maximus takes her up on. But before they go back to Vault 33, they have to find the head. So they head out. And as they make their way through the wasteland, back at Vault 33, there's a little bit of drama because it looks like somebody poisoned a lot of the raiders. And it sure does seem like Norm might be the culprit. But in the meantime, they have a bigger thing going on. They're going to split up the vault. Some people going to Vault 33, some people going to Vault 32. Norm will be staying in Vault 33. Some of the people going to Vault 32 are Woody, Chet, and Stephanie. Norm goes to visit Chet, and he's surprised that Chet is just willing to go into Vault 32, especially after everything he saw. At one point, he calls Chet a coward, and Chet just nods and says, yeah, Norm, we all are. We're living in a vault. Everybody going to Vault 32 has to pack up, and a little while later, they go through a ceremony before they leave Vault 33 forever to start their new lives in Vault 32. And before they do that, they need an overseer. And who does Betty pick? She picks Stephanie. Because after all, Stephanie's from Vault 31. As everybody heads off through the door to Vault 32, Norm decides to sneak off and hop on Betty's computer. He messages the overseer from Vault 31. He tells the overseer that the mission isn't going good and he needs to return to Vault 31 immediately. And the overseer from 31 says, okay, come over. So Norm heads over and the vault opens up and he heads in. Back on the outside, though, his sister, along with Maximus, have made their way to the radio station. They didn't know it, but they inadvertently found Thaddius waiting for his pickup from the Brotherhood. Thaddius tries to fire a gun at him, but he's a horrible shot, and then he trips one of the booby traps, which puts an arrow through his neck, although it doesn't kill him. He can't quite figure out why. And then he pulls the arrow out, and it immediately heals, and that's when Maximus says, Thaddius, I think you're a ghoul. And Thaddius knows, in fact, he is now a ghoul. He never should have trusted that snake oil salesman. Before he can really digest the fact that he now is a ghoul, everybody hears the Brotherhood's helicopters coming. Thaddius knows that if the Brotherhood finds out he's a ghoul, he's going to be dead. So Maximus says, give me the head. It'll give you time to run and get out of here. And with no other options, Thaddius says, yeah, okay, here, thanks, man. And he heads off. But Maximus has no plans to give the head to the Brotherhood. He takes one of the other heads that's lying around, he smashes it, and he gives the actual head to Lucy and tells her, they're not going to know what head it is. So this will give you time to go and get your father. Lucy vows not to leave. Maximus says they're never going to stop looking for it, so head off. And finally, they end up kissing. Right before she leaves, she tells Maximus to find her at Vault 33. She'll be waiting. And then Maximus just waits to get picked up. In Episode 8, when Maximus returns back to the Brotherhood, the first thing they notice isn't the fact that he has the head. It's the fact that he's wearing the outfit of a knight. And Elder Quintus questions him on this, asking, where is your knight? And Maximus says he's dead, which Quintus finds interesting because he looks at it as the second time a brother has fallen into misfortune. And what he's talking about is what happened with Dane. There's part of Quintus that still thinks that Maximus was at fault. But then Maximus gets into deep trouble when they realize that the head that he's brought back isn't actually the head they were looking for. Quintus throws the head back at him. He calls him a liar, and it looks like it's going to be all she wrote for Maximus and the Brotherhood. Actually, it looks like it's going to be all she wrote for Maximus just breathing. Maximus starts begging for his life, saying that he can get them the real head. He can lead them to it. But it's actually Dane who comes to his defense, saying, the injury was my fault, not Maximus. Please, listen to him. So Elder Quintus does. He takes Maximus into a meeting, just he and Maximus. And the first thing he does isn't question Maximus about the head, it's question Maximus about how Knight Titus died, to which Maximus says he died running. He then starts giving Maximus a speech about how the Brotherhood has just lost its way, how they used to rule the wasteland, but not anymore, how power used to be earned, but now it's taken. And that's when he looks at Maximus and tells him, if what you say is true, that you can lead us to the relic, then you and I will take back power. And we will start a new Brotherhood, with me as its head and the likes of you as its sword. Maximus then gives Quintus the location of the conservatory, and the Brotherhood gears up. He's surprised, though, because he sees that Dane is going, and Dane lets him know it's punishment for what I did to myself. Look, I was just scared of going out there. I didn't know that it would get you in trouble. And Maximus says, Dane, that mission, me going out there, that was the best thing that happened to me. I met somebody. And she's still out there, and she's walking into danger. So I'm going to save her, and then I'm going to go back with her to where she came from. She came from a vault. And while Dane thinks that's a great idea, Dane also doesn't believe that anywhere is truly safe. But they don't really have time to chit-chat about it because they have to get into the airships and head off. And they aren't the only ones that are heading to the conservatory. The ghoul is also headed there. And we get more backstory on what happened with the ghoul before the bombs dropped. The ghoul put that listening device on his wife's Pip-Boy, and he listened all right. He did not like what he heard. He went to go drop off his wife at Vault-Tec when he got accosted by one of the higher-ups at Vault-Tec, a guy named Bud Askins. Super annoying guy. Big fan of Coop, but Coop isn't a fan of him. He starts boring Coop to death about his new training program he has for up-and-coming executives. It's called Bud's Buds. Really creative name. It's basically a way to keep some of the executives alive longer so that they can finish off some projects that would take centuries to complete. He's really excited about it. Coop is not. He actually has to head into Vault-Tec because the transmission's going in and out, so he has to get closer to hear what the conversation's going to be. And while he's waiting for his wife to, quote, get out of her meeting, when in reality he's just listening in on it, Barb's secretary asks him if he'd be willing to meet a higher-up that's a huge fan. And that higher-up is actually Hank McClane. But he doesn't actually get excited to meet Hank because while he's shaking his hand, he's overhearing Barb's meeting, and he hears Barb say that the way that Vault-Tec can guarantee results is by dropping the bomb themselves. And that's when Coop realizes that everything that Lee, or whatever she was going by back in the day, everything she said was true. But while the ghoul is headed to the conservatory and the Brotherhood is, and obviously Lucy is, back in the vaults, Norm walks into 31 and he's surprised because nobody's in it. In fact, the only thing in it is a talking Roomba with a brain. And right away, Norm realized that this brain/Roomba is actually the overseer of Vault 31. Norm continues to walk into the vault, and that's when he comes across a bunch of bodies in cryogenic chambers. That's what Vault 31's filled with. Not actual people. Well, they are people, but they're asleep. And that's when the Roomba tells him that these people that are asleep are Bud's buds. Yeah, they outsourced the survival of the American race to the private sector, but it also would have been crazy not to keep Vault-Tec alive. So this entire vault is just filled with Vault-Tec execs. And Hank McClane was one of them. Norm then turns to the Roomba and asks, so what does that make Vault 33 and 32? And the Roomba says that they're just vaults that are breeding grounds for the super managerial type. People that will inherit the earth after they wipe the surface clean. Norm is floored by that statement, the wipe the surface clean statement, and he gets so freaked out. He turns to leave, but the Roomba says, I'm sorry, you've seen too much, you can't leave. The doors then close, and Norm says to the Roomba, are you just going to keep me here? And the Roomba says, well, only until we're ready to go to the surface, which could be a couple hundred years, so I suggest you hop in your dad's pod. There's not much food in here. I'd certainly put myself to sleep if I could. But while Norm has learned the truth, Lucy has not yet. She has, though, arrived at the conservatory. She's the first one to arrive. As soon as she walks to the top of the conservatory, there's her dad locked up in a cage. But there's also Lee. And she's at the table with this completely charred skeleton that somehow is still alive. Lucy walks over to Lee, hands over the head, and says, here you go. I'm bringing you the head. I want my dad. And Lee does take out the artifact from the neck, but then she turns to Lucy and says, well, before I do that, what if I tell you how I know your dad? Yeah, you think your father was born in a vault like you, but that's just not true. That's all right. You're not the only people he lied to. He didn't tell your mother either. And Lucy looks at her and says, what do you know about my mother? And Lee, who has taken the artifact at this point over to a machine and is testing it, tells her she was a lot like you. She was kind, she was loving, she was curious. I mean, isn't that why you came to the surface? Yeah, partly to rescue your father, but to really know why I took him, right? Your mother was so clever, just like you. Your mother discovered that something was siphoning the vault's waterway. And from that one clue, she was able to discern that maybe civilization had returned to the surface. But when she told your dad, he said it was a ridiculous idea and that she should tell no one. And Hank is trying to get Lucy to leave and not believe Lee, but Hank's face also is the face of somebody who knows that he's caught. Lee completely ignores everything that Hank's saying, all the pleas, and she just continues on with the story about how Rose, Lucy's mom, figured out that her husband, the overseer, was hiding things. That's when Rose ran away, and she took her 2 children with her, and she discovered a community, Shady Sands. But Hank went after her, and when he found her in Shady Sands, he tried to get her to come back, but she didn't want to come back. So he took his kids back and then burned that city to the ground. Because that's how Vault-Tec deals with competition, just like they did 200 years ago. And as Lucy thinks about it, memories are starting to pour back from her as a younger girl in Shady Sands with her mom. But not only in Shady Sands, also meeting Lee way back when. Lee then tells Lucy that what Lucy brought her is cold fusion. It's limitless energy. They can build their own world. It can be a better world. But the reason why she has Hank still hostage is because when they bought her company, they made it proprietary. So only a Vault-Tec minion can actually access it. She needs Hank to punch in the code to access the cold fusion. Lucy asks Lee, "My mother, what happened to her?" And that's when that charred skeleton that somehow is still alive starts making noise, and Lucy realizes that that charred skeleton is her mother. This is a lot to take in for Lucy. She starts crying, and she begs her dad to just give Lee the code. Eventually, the tears work. Hank, against his better judgment, does punch in the code, and it unlocks the cold fusion. When that happens, Lee starts going to work, and Hank starts doing some damage control. He starts trying to explain his side to his daughter, but Lucy doesn't want to hear it. And as much as he tries to make Lee the bad guy, it just doesn't seem like that's the case. But as Lee is working on getting the cold fusion ready, they hear an incoming aircraft siren go off, and they know that the Brotherhood is on its way. Lee abandons the cold fusion for the moment and tells her people to get ready for battle because she knows what the Brotherhood's after. And as the Brotherhood touches down and is starting to battle Lee's people, Hank is still trying to tell Lucy that he just did what was necessary. But this battle is vicious, and it has one variable. It's the ghoul. The ghoul was able to get into the conservatory, and he starts shooting a bunch of the Brotherhood of Steel. One of those people isn't Maximus. He's made his way up to the very top where he does find Lucy, and he finds Lucy's dad still locked up. And since he doesn't know any better, he unlocks Hank, because Lucy's still in complete shock. But after Maximus does unlock Hank, that's when Lucy tells Maximus it was him the entire time. He's the one who bombed Shady Sands. And Maximus, who's a survivor, is just as floored as Lucy. But what neither of them notice is once Hank was freed from his cage, he strapped into a Brotherhood of Steel's armor. And he demanded that Lucy come with him, but Maximus, who's enraged at this point, goes to attack him. He's no match for Hank in a Brotherhood of Steel armor. He gets knocked out pretty quickly. Lucy, who's also enraged, decides to put a gun to her dad's face, but her dad isn't concerned. He doesn't believe his daughter's actually going to shoot him, and in fact, Lucy doesn't shoot him, because the ghoul shoots Hank first. It's a graze, but it still hurts. And the ghoul remembers Hank from the first time he met him. He explains that after he heard Lucy's last name, he figured that they must be related. And he's glad that he finally gets a chance to ask the question he's been waiting to ask for 200 years, which is, where is his family? Hank, though, doesn't answer it. Instead, he backs off and flies off, and the ghoul doesn't shoot. He lets him go. Lucy can't believe that the ghoul just let her dad fly off, and he explains that it's easier to chase a wounded animal than to get answers from a dead one. He then says, "You probably want to know how I know your dad. Well, let's just say that everything that's happened in your life was planned out over 200 years ago. Now, you can stay here with Maximus, and when his Brotherhood takes this place, and they are going to take this place, they'll kill you. Or you could come meet your makers." That's a pretty good offer for Lucy. It's the only one she really has. But before she leaves, she has one thing to do. She picks up a gun, and she puts her mother out of her misery. She shoots her. She then has to say goodbye to Maximus, who still isn't conscious at this point, and her and the ghoul head off. They're going to track Hank. And I could be wrong, but it looks like Hank ends up in Seattle. It looks like the Space Needle in the background, but wherever it is, it's definitely a city with a big wall, compound. You get the drift. Now, long after Lucy does leave, Maximus finally comes to. He realizes that nobody's there with him, and he's a little confused. But then he hears somebody coming, and he decides to hide in the shadows. And that person is Lee, who is badly injured. But at this point, her machine to activate cold fusion is ready to go. So she goes and she presses a button. And then she sits down and watches what happens. Maximus also can't help but watch what happens, because all the lights for all the buildings suddenly go on. She asks Maximus, what do you think your brotherhood would do with infinite power? Maybe you can stop them, maybe you can't. Maybe all you can do is try. And then Lee dies. And a few seconds later, Dane and the rest of the brotherhood come up, and Dane asks Maximus, is that their leader? And when Maximus says yes, and Dane looks down and, well, the leader's dead, Dane proclaims to the entire brotherhood that Maximus shall be a knight hereafter. And all the brotherhood starts chanting, all hail Maximus. And Maximus doesn't correct them because at this point, he's torn on what Lee just said. And that is the end of Season 1 of Fallout. Thank you so much for getting to this point of the recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this video sucked. If you leave a comment in the comment section, please just, be nice. Nasty comments make me feel bad. These videos, they take a while to make, so just, if I mess something up, it's okay. You'll live. Oh, and I have merch. Go buy a mug or something. And sharing is caring. Hit that share button and, put it on MySpace or something like that. And I'll be here for Season 2.